De que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
Dumandı bastады далама қарашы, кеңейген жердеген жерге гүл шықты ғой, дәнегіп терілеген қазағым мықты ғой. Менің елім, жырың болып төгілемін, гүлің болып егілемін елім, туған жерім менің Қазақстаным. Айнала қарасам, асықты жүрегім, заманға жарасам, жарасып тұр елім. Біздің ел ордынды көтерді туларды, желмен ол тербелді, тербеле жырладым. Менің елім, жырың болып төгілемін, гүлің болып егілемін елім, туған жерім менің Қазақстаным. Сағындық далам бар, сабырлы көлім бар, қараңдар, жарандар, осындай елім бар. Қарсы алған уақытты ежелгі досындай, біздің ел бақытты, біздің ел осындай. Менің елім, жырың болып төгілемін, гүлің болып егілемін елім, туған жерім менің Қазақстаным. Гүлің болып егілемін елім, туған жерім менің Қазақстаным.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 54, Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. And we came into some revolutionary music from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Kazakhstan, with some beautiful lyrics about patriotism, revolutionary socialism in defense of the motherland of Kazakhstan and all Soviet and working class peoples around the world. Beautiful music from that era, some of my favorite Soviet music that we have to bring back. Today, we're talking about Kazakhstan in the 21st century, the ongoing protest in Kazakhstan, which seem to have died down a bit. We're going to talk about the geopolitical implications of the recent protests, why many are calling it a color revolution, the economic and political forces behind the color revolution, and also the role of color revolutions in the 21st century, in particular with imperialism, also related to what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and attempts by the Western imperialist powers to stoke tensions with Russia, China, and to break up the Belt and Road Initiative in 21st century socialism. And joining me today is my longtime friend, a good comrade, Caleb Maupin, journalist and political analyst. Please subscribe to his channel. Link is in the description to Caleb's channel. He has amazing streams almost every day. I try to catch them when I'm at the gym working out, and his streams are amazing. They're very optimistic, very positive. And Caleb is able to talk about a wide range of topics, and he's been following Kazakhstan pretty closely. So I'm really honored and glad to have you on, Caleb. How's it going?
Oh, all is going well. I really enjoy this channel, and I'm really glad to be back on here.
Thank you so much, Caleb. It's a pleasure. I was listening to your stream the other day. I can't remember what day of the week. And it was really refreshing to hear your commentary about Kazakhstan, because there seems to be some confusion on the left. Some sectors of the left have been cheering on the protest, and very few sources have been pointing out that in many ways this forms part of the color revolution aesthetic and branding, and a lot of the stench, as I mentioned before the stream, the stench of color revolution is there. That's not to say that Kazakhstan is in any way a socialist country, because the second I say that, people say, oh, are you defending 100% the government? Not necessarily. I'm sure there are a lot of legitimate grievances. I think some of the policies that were being imposed in terms of the oil and gas prices, and it's something that you talk about a lot, right? When governments don't put the people ahead of profits, and unfortunately Kazakhstan today is very different from the Kazakhstan of the Soviet socialist era. But that being said, we can look at Kazakhstan's role in Eurasian development in Russia and China. Kazakhstan's biggest trading partners are Russia, China, I think Italy as well. And just seeing how important geopolitically Kazakhstan is to Russia, China, but also for the empire to expand its tentacles into that continent. And so I think that there's so much going on right now. What I want to do is I want to play a clip first from BBC, just giving a general overview about the latest of what's been going on. And then I want to get your general reaction and feedback to what's been going on in Kazakhstan. So let's first go to this clip from BBC.
The president of Kazakhstan has described the protest last week, in which dozens are reported to have died, as an attempted coup. Troops from Russia are currently in the country to try to restore order. And today, President Putin said that Kazakhstan had been targeted by international terrorism. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg is in Kazakhstan's largest city, Almaty, and sent us this report.
Driving into Almaty, you see immediately this is a city on guard. We passed through several army checkpoints. They've been set up to prevent more attacks. In the city centre, reminders of the violence the authorities now say was an attempted coup. Almaty last week. What had started as peaceful protests over fuel prices in another part of Kazakhstan was suddenly looking like war.
These bandits were controlled by terrorists. For the level of organization here, it must have been a criminal group that planned it in advance.
Dozens of people were killed. Thousands have since been detained. There's still a lot of confusion about who was behind this violence. The authorities blame terrorists and bandits. Some here talk about a power struggle in the ruling elite. But one thing is clear, that to stay in power, the president of Kazakhstan had to call on a foreign power for help, and that's Russia. Enter the Russian military. On paper, Russian troops here are peacekeepers, deployed to Kazakhstan as part of a collective security alliance of former Soviet states, the CSTO. But most of the soldiers are Russian, the Kremlin keen to demonstrate its regional power. Addressing CSTO colleagues, President Putin made events fit his wider narrative.
We understand the events in Kazakhstan won't be the last attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of our countries. The measures taken by the CSTO show that we will not allow destabilization at home and for so-called colour revolutions to take place.
After the violence in Almaty, there are mixed feelings here about the arrival of Russian troops. I welcome the Russians coming. Askar says they'll put a stop to it. We should be able to cope ourselves, says Alevtina. Then again, without outside help, there could be civil war. What happened in Kazakhstan has left this country and its people in shock and in fear of what comes next. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Almaty.
So it seems the common talking point, they say enter Russia, they show the scary troops and Putin and making it seem like this is all part of Russia's grand strategy to create the new Russian empire or whatever. It seems to be that, to me at least, that what's going on in Kazakhstan, they're trying to make it seem like what's going on in Ukraine, that Russia is trying to expand its reach, and same with China. On the thumbnail of the stream, actually, as I was looking for pictures, I saw a lot of signs in these protests that say no to Putin's expansion, say no to Chinese expansion, and all of this. Caleb, what's your assessment of what's been going on in Kazakhstan?
Well, I think it's important to maintain a nuanced view because those who are supporting these events and criticizing Russia, they like to mischaracterize what people like myself say and say, oh, you're saying it's all a CIA conspiracy. You're saying that nobody has any legitimate grievances there. And of course, that's not the case. The government in Kazakhstan made a very dumb decision, in my view, which was to lift the cap on natural gas prices at a time that it's a very cold winter in Europe. This is Central Asia, but it's a very cold winter in Europe, and that part of the world in particular is being hit. And at that point, there was a situation where a lot of people suddenly had to pay twice what they were, trying to heat their homes with. And there were people that were very angry about it. And there were a lot of protests around the country, and those protests started out as peaceful protests. But then it seems like a lot of other forces in the country all got the memo at the exact same time. Now's the time to go for it. And this is very similar to something that happened in Iran several years ago. In Iran, there was a protest against banking reforms, that Iran liberalized some of its banking laws. And then there was a private bank in one of the Iranian cities that ripped off the people. And so people were protesting against this bank that had ripped them off. And it was originally a legitimate protest against what a bank had done. But then the United States called up all its allies in Iran, the Mujahideen called terrorists, the Pahlavists, the supporters of the deposed monarchy, the Sunni separatists, and said, okay, now's the time to go for it. So this is a situation where basically we had a Russian-aligned government, take a neoliberal reform and move toward more of a market, situation. We don't have a price cap on natural gas and heating gas for the wintertime in the United States. We don't have a price cap on gasoline here. But they do over there to make sure that people can heat their homes. They have a price cap on it. Well, they lifted that price cap. People were angry about it, and rightly so, I think. They protested, and then other forces seized the moment. And I don't know if people have seen, U.S. media has done a very good job of covering it up. But if you pay attention to any of the media coming out of other parts of the world, like China, like Russia, like non-Western countries, you'll see what happened. That there were trucks driving around the streets of Kazakhstan, handing guns out to people randomly on the streets. Now, gun control is something that people in the United States seem to really want in many parts of the country. Now, could you imagine if there were people just driving around the country handing guns out to random people? We would obviously have a problem with that. In addition to that, it appears some of these protesters were being paid, and they were people that weren't even from Kazakhstan. They were from other parts of the world, and they just responded to some, call on social media. You want to make like the equivalent of $200, which goes a lot further in Kazakhstan than it does in the United States. Go out, show up here, and break some things. Cars just driving into store windows. There was a clip going around of this car, this Hummer, just driving into store window after store window, smashing store windows. So it appears that what started out as a legitimate protest was hijacked by forces that want to cause instability. And that report that you showed, I mean, it was very biased in how it referred to things. You'll notice that just the way they had Putin voiced over. The person reading it was doing it in this maniacal voice, trying to sound maniacal. When in reality, that collective security treaty organization, there is an obligation. Russia is obligated to send troops in to any country that signs the CSTO. So it's not an option. It's not like they can go, oh, we don't want to. No, the president of Kazakhstan called for military support from Russia, and the troops were sent in. And the hilarious thing I thought was just hilarious. It says most of those troops were Russian. Well, it's the Russian army. I mean,
right.
They didn't have enough Chinese troops in the Russian army. They didn't have enough, Korean soldiers or soldiers from Canada. I mean, this is like most of those troops. Who else are they going to send? It's the Russian army, for goodness sakes.
Right.
There are different nationalities within the Russian Federation, but most of those troops are Russian. Yes, that is true. But they're already gone. There was a statement from the U.S. Secretary of State, and he said, once the Russians are in your house, they don't leave. Well, they're already gone. They came, they got the job done, and then they were out of there. But it appears that the United States was trying to sink Kazakhstan into instability, just like they've done with Ukraine since 2014, just like they've done with Belarus in recent months. And it seemed like there was another country along Russia's border that the United States was trying to sink into instability, and they caused a lot of damage and a lot of people got hurt. They took advantage of a situation in the country where there was legitimate outrage. But now we also understand that the leader of the security services in Kazakhstan has been arrested, because it appears that part of what made this happen was infiltration of the Kazakh government. The United States had, kind of networks of people that were loyal to the United States within the security services and apparatuses. So there's kind of a purge going on at this point. This was a test. I think the United States, more than anything, wanted to test, how far they could make this go. And so they saw the right moment. They did it. Kazakhstan has been returned to stability, but at the same time, a lot of people have gotten hurt and 160 people have been killed. And again, did this benefit the people of the country in any way? Now, the price cap was immediately restored. So that was one. As soon as the instability got going, they restored the price cap, but the violent protests continued from those forces. So the price cap was restored, but the forces that wanted something other than the price caps to be lifted, they went in and they continued to riot. But now there is stability restored to the country, it appears.
Definitely, and I'm glad things have calmed down. Anytime there's chaos and violence, I also heard there were some police officers in Kazakhstan who were beheaded, which is pretty crazy and pretty insane if that is true and if that happened. I found this article really interesting. It's from the Daily Mail. Kazakhstan intelligence chief, who was Hunter Biden's close friend and posed with him, and Joe is charged with treason during protests that have seen 160 killed and 80,000 arrested. I find that really fascinating because I know in Ukraine and in Kazakhstan, Hunter Biden has a lot of business dealings, the Biden family. Maybe can you talk a little bit about that, the connections between Biden, Hunter Biden, and what's been going on in Ukraine and Kazakhstan, and how it ties in with the Democrats always trying to provoke war and tension with Russia? Because I think it was you who pointed out really brilliantly in one of your streams that the Democrats tend to attack and hate on Russia and focus on Russia, and the Republicans, especially the neocons, tend to focus on China. So do you think this is part of the Democrats trying to hit Russia even harder? And is there any connection between Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and what's been going on in Kazakhstan and Ukraine?
Well, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has, quite a notorious record and reputation. He got kicked out of the U.S. Navy for using cocaine. He is on the board of Burisma Holdings, which is a natural gas company in Ukraine, even though he has absolutely no experience or connection with natural gas. I mean, he's just he got that job when he was the vice president's son. And now he's the son of the U.S. president. He has no real experience in the industry, but it's just a job he got conveniently right after the 2014 events in Ukraine, in which the United States toppled the government and put the current Kiev government into power. And it should be worth noting that he gets paid quite a bit for that job. It's not a low paying job. I mean, he's getting paid tens of thousands of dollars per month. And I don't know how frequently he's in Ukraine directing these operations, but it's just a job he's got. So a lot of people speculated about this. This came up during the elections. There's video of Joe Biden talking about how he got a prosecutor who was investigating Burisma Holdings for corruption. He got the guy fired, and he's bragging about that at a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations. And this all came out during the elections, and Joe Biden's response to it was, "Oh, this is Russian propaganda. This is Russian propaganda." Well, I don't think the issue is who said it. The issue is it true or not? And there was no denial of any of the facts. You also saw then the weird situation where his laptop, got released to the media, and then the New York Post and some pretty mainstream U.S. media outlets tried to report on it, and social media, Twitter and Facebook, banned the news stories about it. So Hunter Biden's corruption is simply off limits in mainstream U.S. media. His latest example of corruption is, in addition to being a natural gas executive, despite no experience with natural gas, he's now a painter. Hunter Biden is a painter, and he's sold paintings for $500,000.
God.
He's never painted before, but he's just gotten interested in art, and people are buying these paintings for $500,000. So, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, seems to be in a pretty good position, and I'm not sure that it's simply his own merits that has gotten him there. There's plenty of foul play there. But there's kind of an attitude that, among the Trump camp, people talk about this, but mainstream media has just decided that if you talk about it, they accuse you of being a Trump supporter or a Russian asset. So that it's just kind of off limits. But that said, the natural gas markets, right? Natural gas, that tends to be run by U.S. energy firms, right? You've got Devon Energy, which is a very big fracking company based in the United States. You got BP, British Petroleum. They are all over natural gas. And major U.S. oil companies are also in natural gas. And right now, they are making a killing because of the supply chain. Now there's more demand because the pandemic, we're coming out of the pandemic. So there's more demand for natural gas. Businesses that were closed down last year during the winter are now opened up again and wanting to be heated. So there's more demand. Plus, it's an exceptionally cold winter in Europe. Here, it's been a somewhat mild winter, but in Europe, it's been an exceptionally cold winter. The price of natural gas is very high right now. It's very expensive. And so American natural gas companies and British natural gas companies are making a killing. And they're making a killing in particular selling natural gas to Western Europe, to the NATO countries, Belgium, Germany, France. They're making quite a bit of money. And there's this natural gas pipeline called the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that connects Russia to Germany. And if that pipeline were to just get turned on, there would suddenly be a whole bunch of natural gas on the European markets, and the price of natural gas would decrease. Furthermore, the Gazprom, the Russian state-run natural gas company, is happy to start selling to Europe, and they don't sell at the current market price. They sell for a long-term rate. Like an average rate. So they would actually be selling gas for cheaper than what it's selling for right now. So if countries in Europe were to actually start buying natural gas from Russia, then the price of natural gas would drastically reduce, right? American and British natural gas companies would have to drop the price to compete with Russia's long-term contracts price. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline would add more gas to the market overall, and the price would just drop. So what they're afraid of is that if there were not tension with Russia, if things between the United States and Russia were to just get better, right? If Europe, the Western European countries and Russia, NATO and Russia were all getting along, then there would be no political reason for Russia not to be part of this. And all these natural gas companies that are making a killing right now off these really high prices, they would suddenly lose their gouging party. They're gouging right now. They're making the most of a bad situation. They're making huge profits right now because of this perfect storm of situations that have driven the price up, and they're afraid that Russia will ruin it. And so to prevent Russia from ruining it, there is just relentless tension with Russia. And first it's something in Ukraine, and they're alleging Russia's going to invade Ukraine, and then Biden and Putin meet. And now it's Kazakhstan, and then Biden and Putin meet. And it's like they're trying to just keep things going and escalate it as long as they can, because that price is so high right now. They don't want to lose out. There is a direct financial incentive behind this situation. I mean, this isn't speculation. This is not about like hegemony or long-term imperialist domination. This is about their paycheck. If USA and Russia start getting along, they lose money fast, and they don't want it. There is a direct financial incentive for the USA and Russia to be at odds with each other right now. But it's very dangerous because the threat of a new world war is hanging over our heads. And, you know, when Russia sees its neighbor Ukraine in instability, its neighbor Belarus in instability, its neighbor Kazakhstan in instability, and Russia has nuclear weapons, and the United States has nuclear weapons, and this could all lead to a very bad situation. Something could go wrong. There could be some kind of accident or some kind of miscommunication that could have catastrophic results, that could result in, God forbid, some kind of nuclear war or World War III or something like that, right? We've seen some pretty close calls in Syria where airplanes get shot down or Russian troops Turkey, there was a situation, and that we've had some pretty close calls over the last 5-6 years. And if this desire for escalation is not contained, if we, the American people, don't stand up to the oil and gas giants and the military industrial complex and say, I don't care how much money you got on the line, you can't take us closer to World War III and the annihilation of the planet. If we don't do that, there's going to be some problems coming up. And the scary thing is, there are people that are close to Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, and there are people that are close to the British royal family who are openly talking about how the planet can only have 500 million people. They want to drastically reduce the human population. So, if you've got people talking about how we should only have 500 million people because that's all Mother Earth can sustain, and then they're escalating us closer to World War III, why would we be surprised, right? I mean, a nuclear war would kill 2/3 of the human race. So we're not even down to 500 million, right? We've got about 7 billion people in the world right now. So you'd have to kill a lot more than 2/3 of the human race to get it down to what they think is natural. So think about that, right? I mean, with all this talk of overpopulation, there may be some kind of deranged psychotic faction within the international ruling class that is openly thinking, hey, if we had a nuclear war, that wouldn't be so bad. They know how they'll be safe. And then at the same time, that would get them back into the balance with Mother Nature that they seem to think is correct. So this is very, very serious. We need to be demanding peace. We need people throughout the world to be in the streets right now demanding peace, demanding international friendship and cooperation between Russia and China and the United States. Really, we need a multipolar world. Beijing and Moscow and Washington should stand together. During the 1930s, 1939, Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party, he called for a Moscow, Beijing, Washington axis. That's what he called it. A new axis of Washington, Moscow, and Beijing during the Second World War. And if that had happened, right? If that had happened, there probably wouldn't have been a Second World War. Well, there's hope now. There's hope now, I think. There's many people in the United States that feel like Joe Biden doesn't represent them, that these big oil and gas monopolies are out of control. They want better living standards here. And they're resisting neoliberalism and the drive to kind of drive the world into one global open international market. So I think that there's potential here. That's kind of my analysis of this whole situation.
I definitely agree. And, thank you for that. I have to admit, as I told you before the stream, I'm just now learning about Kazakhstan. I don't know much, and I'm really appreciative that you're able to give this analysis, because I think, just like you said, you always have to follow the money. This is not about some abstract concept of hegemony, or this is about profits. This is about undermining Russian-Chinese cooperation and also the Belt and Road Initiative. And by the way, shout out to everybody who's watching, listening, to Comrade Erica, to David, Big Teal. If you have any questions, and I see a few of them already are in the chat related to Kazakhstan, please go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them so that we can ask Caleb. What I want to do, Caleb, is I want to play a clip about Kazakhstan's role in the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's interesting. I was reading Xi Jinping's amazing book, The Governance of China. And the Belt and Road Initiative, I believe, was actually announced in Kazakhstan at an event. I'm not sure what year, if it was 2013 or a little bit earlier. And Kazakhstan has always been very crucial to the Chinese dream, the Eurasian dream, the people's dream of creating the New Silk Road, which existed, I think, over 1,000 years ago in Eurasia, that connected China to Europe, to all over the world, and reviving that under a socialist path, under a path of multipolar development. And for me, it's something that's very exciting and even extends now to Latin America and the Caribbean. We see Nicaragua joining the Belt and Road Initiative, hopefully Honduras as well with Xiomara Castro de Celaya, and other nations that are joining this. So I want to play a clip about Kazakhstan's role in the Belt and Road Initiative, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about Kazakhstan's key position in this Eurasian development and why communists, leftist, anti-imperialists should defend this vision and dream of the BRI and the New Silk Road.
Diplomatic ties between Astana and Beijing developed shortly after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, with both countries moving on to co-found the Shanghai Five, now known as the Shanghai Cooperation Council. Today, Kazakhstan's strategic geography provides the path to China's economic outreach, while China's growing investments provides Kazakhstan's path to modernization.
This year, Kazakhstan and China celebrate 25 years of diplomatic relations. And since the launch of the One Belt, One Road initiative, their economic relations too are thriving. China has surpassed Russia as the main investor in the region in a number of sectors, including energy and railways.
Beijing's investments have been diverse, spending nearly $30 billion in the country's mining, oil, agriculture, and transport sectors. China has provided loans and expertise to help build up Kazakhstan's railway network. In turn, this has helped extend the export of Chinese goods around the world.
It goes without saying we have a lot of programs together with China. And first of all, we needed to increase carrying capacity of our infrastructure to promote this Silk Way. If you take a look at the container trains shipments from China to Europe and back, from 2011 up to 2006, the container flows went up to 100 times. In 2011, it was 1,000 containers. In 2016, it was 105,000 containers.
Currently, it takes around 2 weeks for a container to reach any destination in Europe, 3 times faster than sea and much cheaper than air. The network is capable of carrying 50 million tons of goods per year, but Beijing and Astana are working to double that by 2020. In line with that, China has contributed more than $600 million to the Khorgos dry port on the Kazakh-Chinese border, which has seen more than $3.1 billion in investment since it began operating in April 2012, according to its management. Analysts also say China's economic relationships with other Central Asian countries are benefiting regional diplomacy.
Well, One Belt, One Road project, it became a new impulse for the region. Central Asia as a region is not much connected. There's a lack of connectivity within the region. Chinese policy provides currently a new agenda for the region in this respect.
Yet some Kazakhs fear what China's economic input could mean for the country's independence.
There is certainly a lack of understanding, among the people-to-people exchange. We might speak about New York, Milan, or Europe more than we speak about Dalian, Shenzhen, or other countries.
While China is trying to promote a positive nonpartisan image, Kazakhstan remains a nation still on the crossroads, both geographically and politically. While it wants China's investments, it fears the possible costs and a repeat of its Soviet past. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Astana, Kazakhstan.
So Caleb, with that in mind, right, it seems like Kazakhstan has gone through a lot of ups and downs prior to the Soviet Union during the Russian Empire. For many years, Kazakhstan was underdeveloped, no connectivity. With the rise of the Soviet Union, especially under Stalin, so much of that region was industrialized, not obviously to its full potential that it is today, but so much of the development that exists in Kazakhstan and Central Asia is because of Soviet socialism. However, after the Soviet Union was overthrown in a coup, so much was privatized. There was a lot of chaos. And now with the Belt and Road Initiative, it seems like things are more positive. Can you talk a little bit about that, the impact of BRI, not only on Kazakhstan, but Central Asia, and also some of the successes of socialism and central planning in Central Asia?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that there's a little bit more to it, than just the issue of socialism versus capitalism. I mean, this goes back many years. But one thing that's important to note, and this is something that many critics of the Soviet Union just don't ever seem to acknowledge and don't really know. But they took a vote at the time that the Soviet Union was dissolved. There was a referendum on whether or not the Soviet Union should be kept, and the people of the Soviet Union, Russia, and the surrounding republics, they voted to keep the Soviet Union. But what's interesting is that the vote and the percentage of the vote was much higher in countries like Kazakhstan than it was in Russia. People in Kazakhstan, people in Ukraine, people in the smaller republics wanted to keep socialism more and wanted to keep the Soviet Union more than people in Russia did. And that's because the development that they saw with the Soviet Union, the industrialization, the electrification, the wiping out of illiteracy, these measures really improved life. And there was a fear that cutting off from the Soviet Union, isolating, would lead to economic catastrophe, which it did. The fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster, not just in Russia, but in many of the surrounding countries that are very small. And really their whole hope for development was tied in with their alliance with Russia and economic development. When the Soviet Union fell, it just devastated them. It was bad in Russia. It was very bad in Russia, but in the surrounding republics, it was even worse. Kazakhstan, historically, a very large Muslim population. The government of the Soviet Union did a lot to try and accommodate the Muslim population there, because some of the Muslims there were anti-communist, right? There were, especially during the Second World War, a lot of the Nazis tried to mobilize the Muslims to fight against the Soviet Union and to fight on their side. So a lot was done to accommodate it. For example, during Stalin's leadership in Russia, any woman who had more than 10 children, she got a medal called Mother of the Soviet Union. It was called. Now, that was gotten rid of after Stalin's death because they said, we don't need to really encourage people to have that many children. But in the Islamic regions, where there is a real, kind of cultural emphasis on women and the idea that you should have a big family and such, they actually kept the medal for the Mother of the Soviet Union. And that's one thing that was kept. And so they continued to incentivize people to have children because there was a cultural feeling that was a good thing. And in addition to that, Islam did exist. It wasn't completely outlawed. There were mosques and such. And there was an effort to find Muslim leaders who were in line with communism and were not hostile. Now, Saudi Arabia, we understand, with the help of the United States, was playing the opposite role and trying to cultivate Wahhabis and extremists that would be against socialism. But we also know that the war in Afghanistan that broke out, part of Brzezinski's strategy is he wanted to foment an Islamic insurgency throughout the southern USSR. It wasn't just for Afghanistan. And we know that the US government was arming Chechen separatists and extremists that were of a Muslim character. So there's a lot of history going on there. But really, you want to put this in bigger geopolitical terms. There's an old Soviet movie that you can find on the internet that is definitely worth watching. And it's called Ivan the Terrible. It was made during World War II by the great Soviet film director Sergei Eisenstein. And the movie talks about Ivan the Terrible, this great czar who unified all of the region. He created the modern Russian Empire. And he's widely loved because in Eurasia, when they're together, they're better off. In China, you've been there, you've heard it. There's a lot of emotions about Taiwan. There's a lot of emotions about Hong Kong. There's a lot of emotions about Tibet because part of the way the imperialists kept China poor was by dividing it and playing the different nationalities and religious groups and ethnic minorities and such against each other. But Ivan the Terrible, this czar who was quite authoritarian, he's respected in Russian history because he unified the people of different nationalities, Muslims, Christians, into one Russian empire. And then that resulted in living standards rising for the region. And that it's not the same concept of empire that you have with the British or the Romans, right? The British and the Romans held back development. They kept the regions that they conquered impoverished and used them as captive markets. They functioned as the middleman in global trade, and that's how they made their profits. The British dominated the world with their navy. They controlled the seas. The Romans, they had a phrase, all roads lead to Rome, meaning that, that you couldn't trade with another section of the empire. They were the middleman in global trade. Well, the way that, the Chinese, Qing dynasty ruled, the way that the Romanovs and the Tsars ruled was very different. It was about economic development. It was about creating kind of bridges of trade between these areas. When you talk about the Silk Road, and all of this brought development to Central Asia. When I went to Sochi, Russia, I went to the Valdi Discussion Club, where I spoke. I spoke with different guests that were there, but I was able to listen to Aysel Toji of the Norwegian Nobel Institute, and he spoke on a panel along with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, as well as with Jack Ma, and of Alibaba, and Hamid Karzai, the former president of Afghanistan. And what Aysel Toji of the Norwegian Nobel Institute said is, he said that in Eurasia right now, this is a golden era. The electrification projects and the construction efforts that are going on. There's, if you look at a map, Eurasia is this big section of the map. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan. I mean, you look at this huge section of the map that we never hear anything about, right? But there's people who live there. But those people have lived in a state of underdevelopment. However, with the Belt and Road Initiative, with Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, they are coming out of that underdevelopment. They are moving toward a new state of development, and that is bringing stability. It's cutting into the opium trade and the drug gangs and the terrorist groups that have plagued that region. It's bringing people of different nationalities and religious groups and ethnicities together. It's all playing a very, very positive role. The China-Pakistan economic corridor is also a very big part of it. I just wanted to talk about that, and that's what's going on there. And this destabilization that followed the protests around the natural gas price cap is about kind of stopping that and trying to prevent this kind of economic explosion. Zbigniew Brzezinski, the CIA strategist, and the foreign policy guru who was close to Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, he wrote that the strategy for dominating Eurasia is to, quote, keep the barbarians killing each other. He referred to Eurasia as the grand chessboard, right? And that's his book, The Grand Chessboard, is about ensuring U.S. domination of Eurasia. And part of his strategy was to, quote, keep the barbarians killing each other, play religious and ethnic groups against each other. He talked about a strategic corridor of instability in that region, from the Middle East all the way up into Central Asia. And U.S. foreign policy reflects that. I mean, the USA kept Afghanistan unstable for 20 years. Now the USA has pulled out of Afghanistan, and people are starving and hungry. The USA has overthrown governments in Iraq and elsewhere, and that this is part of a strategy for preventing Eurasia from rising and becoming an opposite pole on the global stage. The USA seems to want unipolarity, the entire globe to be centered around the United States and Britain. And in Eurasia, there is an alternative pole that's growing, and they're trying to suppress it.
Most definitely. And even just looking at a map of Kazakhstan, it's something that I encourage people to always do whenever we're talking about a particular nation and regime change and color revolutions. Just take a second to look at where it's placed, what's around it, because a lot of times that shows a lot about the nature of protests or events going on. And what I find interesting about Kazakhstan is that to the southeast of Kazakhstan is a nation called Kyrgyzstan, which is actually where the U.S. has been building up a lot of military bases. I knew somebody who was in U.S. military and was saying that that's a very important region of the U.S. Armed Forces, Kyrgyzstan. which is also right next to Western China, Xinjiang province, where the US has been trying to make accusations of genocide and saying that the Chinese government is systematically oppressing the Uyghurs. And also not too far away is Afghanistan, which obviously the US occupied for over 20 years. And it borders Russia. It's close to Iran. So Kazakhstan, like you said, Caleb, is very important to this chessboard that the liberal imperialist Western Empire sees as crucial to maintaining a wedge. It's literally like a wedge between Russia and China. One of the things you pointed out a while back that I thought was really fascinating was that one of the comments that might have gotten Trump in trouble with some of the higher ups in the intelligence agencies was when he publicly said that one of our biggest mistakes as the US was to drive Russia and China together and to allow Eurasian development. So it seems like destabilizing this region, Kazakhstan and Afghanistan, Western China, will be so crucial to US imperialism. I find that really fascinating. By the way, if anybody has any questions for Caleb, please put them in the chat. I have one from Comrade Erica. She said, does Caleb have any thoughts on the Socialist Party of Kazakhstan? I also believe it's the socialist movement of Afghanistan has been supporting the protests. And I was looking at some research on the socialist movement of Kazakhstan. I saw that previously they were with the Trotskyist International. I found that to be really interesting. What are your thoughts on the left in Kazakhstan and in Eurasia after the Soviet Union? What are some of the splits, especially when it comes to like China and Russia?
Well, I attended the World Conference of Parliamentarians that was held in Moscow. And I actually met government officials from Kazakhstan, and I heard them give speeches warning about the danger of color revolutions and how social media could be whipped up for it. And that was before the pandemic. That was a while back. So they on some level, there was some knowledge that something like this might be in the future. But it's very interesting that, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has put out a statement. And from what I understand, they have said that on the one hand, they obviously condemn, the instability and the violence, but they want to separate it from the peaceful protests, about price caps. And that, again, Kazakhstan was once ruled by a communist party. I mean, it was a Soviet republic that had an official communist party. And many of the government officials, if not all of them, are people that have some kind of family relationship, or their parents were in that communist party, or they themselves were officials in that communist party. So Marxism is very influential there. Now, obviously, the Marxist groups, groups that are out there calling themselves Marxists, is a little bit different than the influence of Marxism. And that's one thing that I kind of urge leftists around the world to kind of make the distinction. But you're gonna in every country in the world, you have what you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that's a group of people that are like college professors, young people, intellectuals, and they're usually from somewhat privileged backgrounds. And they get into anarchism or Trotskyism or some kind of revolutionary ideology that's more about aesthetics and emotions and libidinal release. And that doesn't represent everyone in the country who might want socialism, right? That doesn't represent everyone in the country who wants a better life. And you saw for yourself that in the Bolivarian countries, that's not, the base of Hugo Chavez and Maduro. That's not the base of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. So it's important to distinguish. You might hear a statement from some group that's aligned with the Fifth International or the Fourth International. That group probably has less than 1,000 members, okay? But the amount of people in the country that take Marxism seriously, that respect and honor the Soviet Union, that probably look up to Stalin, the bulk of those people are not involved with those organizations. And so you have to make that distinction.
That's a great point, because when I lived in Ecuador, me and Ophelia lived in Ecuador, it was a very interesting dynamic, because a lot of the groups, exactly like you said, that had the name communist or Marxist or proletarian in the name, they sided with the right wing against Correa. There was a communist party that was led by a lot of private school, petty bourgeois kids who were kind of anarchisty or Maoist. And they had signs that said, down with Correísmo, who was Rafael Correa, the president, left-leaning, an amazing president, one of my favorite presidents. and they said they had a sign that said "Vote for Lasso." Lasso is the current president of Ecuador, who's a neoliberal banker from Guayaquil, from the coast, right wing as hell. And I was so confused because they had like hammer and sickles and red flags and all that, and it says "Vote for Lasso, down with Correísmo." And then they had like Marxists and communists and proletarian in their name. And then you talk to Correa's followers, the base of the Correa fan supporters, and they're taxi drivers. They're really working class people. And some of them even didn't have necessarily far left views. They viewed it in terms of development, very nuts and bolts. It was like, Correa improved my standard of living. I'm making more money. I'm better able to provide for my family. They weren't even necessarily like these ideological Marxists talking about Gramsci and sipping lattes at a cafe. Like, they were cab drivers, they were like street vendors, and they supported Correa. But the dynamic in Ecuador was that the petty bourgeois left, ultra left people, they saw them as right wing and Correa's right wing, but then they were left wing and they were in alliance with the neoliberal bankers. So I totally agree with you, man. We can't rely on labels and names. And I think a lot of times people get so fixated on that. They're like, oh, well, the Communist Party or the Socialist Party of this says that. So is that I'm a communist? So I guess they're right, but they're not. And I think that's definitely an issue, especially in countries that have already gone through the process of socialist revolution, where you have a lot more of those contradictions that take place. Same in Nicaragua as well. There's a group in Nicaragua called MRS, like the Sandinista Re-Innovation Movement, that claims to be even more radical than the FSLN and the Sandinistas, but they're like pro-empire. So it's crazy. It's just it's really interesting to think about that. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Caleb, is can you talk a little bit about the differences between the current president? Because what I found interesting about Kazakhstan is that the former president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, he actually ruled from 1990 to 2019 for a long time after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. And then the current president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, he's only been president since March of 2019. Is there any difference politically between these two? And what are some of the changes you think moving forward that are going to take place in Kazakhstan?
Well, one thing I can just say about that, and I don't know enough about the specifics to really give a definitive answer to that. But when we see these presidents who've been in office a very long time, there is a tendency on the part of Americans to say, "Oh, that must be a dictatorship. Oh, that must be clearly if someone's been in office that long, it can't be fair." But they forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was one of the most loved presidents in U.S. history. They've done a poll. The two most popular presidents in U.S. history are Lincoln and Roosevelt. Roosevelt, he got elected in 1932, and then he got reelected in 1936, and then he got reelected in 1940, and then he got reelected in 1944, and then he died, right? But, people had no problem voting for him again and again and again and again, because he kind of represented this kind of populist push against corporations and bankers, et cetera. And they imposed term limits to prevent another Roosevelt from ever coming back in the United States. And that often leaders who do represent the will of the people and have a kind of a relationship with the people, like a Juan Perón, for example, or a Fidel Castro, where they really have the pulse of the people. They know what the people want deep in their heart, and they are able to articulate it, kind of what was expressed in the very important book, The Role of the Individual in History, by the father of Russian Marxism, Yuri Plekhanov. When an individual who comes along who articulates what the masses want and kind of has their thumb on the heartbeat of the masses, when they come along, often they will stay in power for a very long time. And that often it is that kind of dynamic personality that makes it so hard to defeat them. And that's what the ruling class is very afraid of. After Roosevelt here in the United States, they passed term limits. And so then, there was a famous interview with John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy was asked on one of these late night talk shows, do you believe in term limits? And he said, sure, I believe in term limits. And my brother Bobby, he also believes in term limits. And my brother Teddy, he also believes in term limits, and that the Kennedys, yeah, there were term limits, but they were a family brand. And that may have been why Kennedy ultimately was removed from the presidency, in Dallas, Texas. Because even though he himself couldn't get reelected more than one time, he still represented a potential brand, a political brand that could kind of give voice to some of those sentiments. And like Roosevelt, he had aligned himself with the mass popular movement. So, you look at that and people want to look at that and they want to say, oh, see, it's a cult of personality. See, it's a dictatorship. This guy was in office for so long. I wouldn't put it that way. I don't see it that way. I think that, and especially in countries that are developing, people want the security of somebody who can deliver over a long period of time, and that a lot changed during those years. Putin really reversed neoliberalism. Putin started moving the world away from neoliberalism in that part of the world. And the fact that he aligned with Kazakhstan's leadership in order to do that brought a new level of stability to the country. Russia's economy got better, and then Kazakhstan's trades primarily with Russia. Things got better for them. China continued to expand. I think people probably saw living standards get better under that leader, and so they probably went out and voted for him once again. And in our kind of liberal Western mindset, where you pick a new one every 4 years, and it's a little bit of a different when a country is very underdeveloped and people are just getting electricity and just getting running water and just rising out of poverty. The mindset is a little bit different than our kind of, people joke about American political idol in the United States, where we have a new season every election and we're looking for, whichever reality TV star, makes us smile the most. People's attitude is a little bit different. They want somebody who will get in there and deliver the goods. And if somebody's been doing a good job and things have been getting better, they say, don't change horses midstream. They say, let's not upturn things. If this guy did a good job, we'll keep him in there. So that's kind of my thinking on that.
Most definitely. And I find it interesting as well, because the countries that in Central America that exemplify that perfectly, Honduras and Nicaragua, you have Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, who has been president for many years, just was inaugurated as president of Nicaragua. And every person I spoke to in Nicaragua, I'm sure you had this experience as well when you were out there, was like, we don't care if he's there for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, he's our leader. He's our commander, Comandante Daniel. And people want that security and stability. It's kind of like, imagine if you're on an airplane flight, and every hour you're on a flight from New York to LA, like a 5-hour flight. And every hour there's like a new pilot, that would kind of make you a little bit uneasy, right? Because you're like, okay, maybe the next one doesn't know what he's doing, or there's no communication. Honduras, which neighbors Nicaragua, has supposedly a new president every 4 years, and it's horrible. It's one neoliberal puppet after another. Hopefully now things will change with Xiomara Castro Zelaya, but we'll see. And I definitely agree with you. I think that this understanding of democracy being when you have a new leader every 4 years is complete nonsense. And I think that we're moving toward an era where populism is becoming more popular. And I think, like you say in a lot of your streams, the left wing has to take back the mantle of populism and bring it back to the masses. Because from what I've seen around the world, populist leaders, people who speak for the working class, regardless of whatever cultural views or social views they have, if they speak to the material needs of the masses, those are the people we have to pay attention to. And I feel like this points to a broader discrepancy and contradiction we're seeing, not just in the US, you talk about this a lot as well, but all over the world, where you have this divide between the cosmopolitan liberal leftists who only focus on social issues, and the politically incorrect, dumb, backward, working class people who are branded as right wing or reactionary, but have more of that populist sentiment and base. And I think in Kazakhstan, I see something similar happening. Is a lot of the interviews, you have the people who are branded as kind of like dumb or working class people saying, like, I support Russia coming in and Armenia and all these other countries maintaining order, and I support the Belt and Road Initiative. But then you have like the more kind of latte coffee shop leftists who are like, we want chaos, we just want to continue burning buildings and overthrowing stuff. And I think it's a division that's happening globally, and I find that really fascinating. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. But thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure to interact with you. I think we gave the audience a pretty good assessment of what's going on. I wish mainstream media would tell people the insights that we give people on here. What you're doing with this channel is really, really important. Unmasking imperialism is probably the most important task of our time.
Thank you so much, Caleb. And everybody, please make sure to check out Caleb's channel. The link is in the description. He does streams usually like every day or every other day. Make sure to catch them. They're pretty good. And what I like about the format of your streams too is that you touch on a whole bunch of different topics, and you interact with a lot of the super chats. So everybody, please make sure to check out Caleb's channel. Thank you so much, Caleb. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Anything you'd like to plug or put out before we head out?
Nope, but I would just say that I'm streaming on YouTube all the time, and there's a lot of great folks. Our community is connected to many other great communities, whether it's you and Unmasking Imperialism, or Dust James, Anti-Imperialist America, or Jackson Hinkle, or Hazen Infrared. There's a great network of people developing that are genuinely interested in these concepts and ideas, and I really want to see our bubble, our network continue to expand.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Caleb. Take care. And thank you to everybody who's watching and listening. We're going to go out with some more music from the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.